Millions of lives at stake, thousands already gone. The world stands frozen, teetering on the razor's edge of war. August 17, 2025, in the vast, dark silence of the Pacific Ocean, 3 Chinese intercontinental ballistic missiles tore through the night sky. Each one traveled at over 15,000 miles per hour, 20 times the speed of sound. Their target, a U.S. aircraft carrier strike group, America's most powerful symbol of naval might. In minutes, the lives of thousands of American sailors hung in the balance. The missiles screamed closer, unstoppable bolts of fire aimed to rewrite history. 2 of them were destroyed by U.S. defenses, but one detonated close enough to gouge a hole in the hull of the USS Ronald Reagan, hurling a $70 million F-18 Super Hornet into the sea. The world had not seen a clash like this since the Cuban Missile Crisis. The United States responded instantly. B-2 stealth bombers, Tomahawk cruise missiles, and precision strikes wiped out 20% of China's nuclear arsenal in a single night. Beijing retaliated with fury, launching 20 ICBMs at American cities. But what really happened on that ship? Could the sailors of the Ronald Reagan have survived? And after America's devastating counterstrike, was China's retaliation successful? Lore crashed before it began. Let us walk through the night when the world came inches away from nuclear Armageddon. The first strike, August 17, 2025 to 2:13 a.m. The Pacific night was calm until suddenly, the stillness shattered. Deep inside China's mainland, 3 massive ICBMs roared skyward. Each missile weighed over 80 tons and cost more than $110 million to build. Each had one purpose: to annihilate America's naval supremacy in the waters near Taiwan. Aboard the USS Ronald Reagan, radar operators jolted to life as screens lit up with flashing warnings. Battle alarms screamed through the ship, jolting thousands of sailors awake. At 15,000 miles per hour, the warheads would reach them in just 12 minutes. For every man and woman on those vessels, the countdown to life or death had begun. The U.S. defense systems roared awake, the Aegis combat system locked on. Thought interceptors armed themselves for the fight. At 180 miles out, the first missile was destroyed, obliterated in a fireball brighter than lightning. Seconds later, the second warhead was torn apart at 70 miles altitude, raining harmless fragments into the ocean. But the third missile was different. It flew lower, faster, using electronic countermeasures to mask its approach. It slipped through America's shield, bearing down on the carrier group like a spear of fire. With only seconds left, an SM-6 interceptor connected. The missile exploded in mid-air but too close. The blast slammed into the USS Ronald Reagan. With the force of 10 tons of TNT, a hole the size of a truck was ripped open in her starboard hull. Below deck, 7 sailors were thrown into steel bulkheads, critically injured. On the flight deck, a fully armed F-18 Super Hornet was ripped from its landing gear and hurled into the sea. For the first time since World War II, a U.S. aircraft carrier had been struck by a foreign power. The echoes of the Cuban Missile Crisis hung in the air. The world had crossed into new and dangerous territory. Yet amid the chaos, there was one cold fact: America had stopped the unthinkable. 2 missiles destroyed, 1 neutralized at the very edge of disaster. Thousands of lives were saved. But the message from Beijing was clear: China was no longer bluffing. The response at 3:01 a.m., Rear Admiral Thomas Caldwell, commander of the strike group, secured a line to the Pentagon. His voice was steady but laced with fury. This was no warning shot. This was an assassination attempt on 5,000 American sailors. The numbers told the truth. Had one warhead broken through completely, the equivalent of 1.5 million pounds of TNT would have sunk the Ronald Reagan outright, killing thousands in seconds and sending a $13 billion warship to the bottom of the Pacific within 5 minutes. President Donald Trump was briefed. Advisors argued over restraint, but time was slipping away. At 3:08 a.m., he gave the order in 4 words: strike back. Make it count. Operation Vengeance. The plan unfolded. With terrifying precision, EA-18G Growlers launched first, flooding Chinese radar networks with blinding electronic noise across a 200-mile corridor. Behind them, for B-2 Spirit stealth bombers, each worth $2 to billion, carried GBU-57 bunker busters, 30,000-pound bombs, capable of burrowing to 100 feet through reinforced concrete before detonation. For KC-135 tankers flew with them, carrying enough fuel to keep the bombers airborne for over 12 hours. Above, 20 F-35 Lightning II fighters, a combined worth of $6 billion, formed a deadly aerial shield. Then came the 15 Tomahawk cruise missiles, each with a 1,000-mile range and a 1,000-pound warhead. They would strike just seconds after the bombers, compounding the devastation. At 3:22 a.m., the order was signed. Flight decks thundered as catapults launched aircraft into the black sky. In mere minutes, over $10 billion in American firepower surged toward China's coast. For the sailors watching from the deck, fear was gone, only resolve remained. China had struck first, now America would respond, and the world would remember. What came next? The retaliation. By 3:30 a.m., Growlers screamed off the decks, their afterburners igniting the night. Within minutes, Chinese radar stations across Fujian and Guangdong fell into chaos, blinded by waves of electronic interference. Then came the shadows. At 3:47 a.m., the B-2 bombers crossed silently into range. Each aircraft's radar cross-section was no larger than a bird. Inside, their bays lay the massive GBU-57 bunker busters, each capable of shattering underground silos and command centers. The stage was set for devastation. Through 200 feet of reinforced concrete, the weapons would drive like spears. Each bomb carried the explosive punch of 11 tons of TNT, more than enough to flatten entire city blocks. As the formation closed in, the strike group readied its second hammer blow. 15 Tomahawk cruise missiles arced into the night sky, hugging the terrain at nearly 550 miles per hour. Their launch and arrival were synchronized down to the second, time to strike immediately after the B-2's payload, so that the overlapping shockwaves would merge into a single cataclysmic blast. At precisely 4:02 a.m., the first bombs hit. The target, China's missile production facility in Qingdao, an immense underground fortress sprawling the size of 40 football fields. The ground heaved as the bunker busters tore through layers of earth, smashing into the core of the complex. The detonations shook the earth with the force of a 5 for magnitude quake. Sections of heavily reinforced concrete buckled and collapsed inward, crushing silos and command bunkers beneath thousands of tons of debris. Within moments, the Tomahawks arrived, igniting the ruins in a raging inferno. Witnesses later described a fireball half a mile across, consuming the horizon. Simultaneously, the second B-2 struck its target, a massive fuel depot in Fujian. Its bunker-busting payload pierced deep into underground reservoirs containing more than 5 million gallons of volatile propellant. The explosions unleashed a violent chain reaction. The firestorm climbed 2,000 feet into the sky, visible even from the coast of Taiwan. The 3rd and 4th B-2 South turned their fury on a hardened command center outside Shanghai, engineered to survive nuclear assault. But nothing could endure 60,000 pounds of steel and explosives unleashed in less than half a minute, followed by the surgical strikes of precision cruise missiles. Communications towers disintegrated, reinforced walls split and collapsed. Inside the bunker, senior Chinese officers to major generals among them were killed instantly. When the smoke began to lift, the scale of devastation became clear. Over 300 Chinese troops were dead, 200 wounded, and 3 of Beijing's most critical military installations lay in ruins. Entire missile brigades had been crippled in less than 1 hour. Aboard the U.S. fleet in the Pacific, the effect was electrifying. Radar screens that once blazed with hostile signals now glowed empty. The Chinese mainland burned in 3 separate locations, its missile forces shattered, its command structure silenced. Sailors aboard the USS Ronald Reagan stared eastward, knowing they were witnessing a historic turning point. For many, it felt like a replay of the Gulf War's shock and awe, but magnified tenfold. In under 60 minutes, America had dropped more than 200,000 pounds of explosives, the equivalent of 20 Hiroshima bombs of raw conventional firepower, without the loss of a single aircraft. The message was unmistakable: China had struck. The United States and America had answered with fury, precision, and destruction unseen in decades. Yet this was only the opening act. Beijing would not remain silent. Deep within China's command bunkers, preparations for retaliation had already begun. Beijing's response came with startling speed, even as smoke still choked the skies over Qingdao, Fujian, and Shanghai. The Chinese war rooms erupted in chaos. Screens went dark, communications fractured. The loss of key officers left command chains in disarray, but humiliation was intolerable. At 4:30 a.m., orders thundered across. The 2nd Artillery Corps retaliate massively. Missile crews scrambled into silos, opening sealed safes to withdraw launch keys. Within 12 minutes, more than 20 intercontinental ballistic missiles stood fueled, armed, and ready. These were not bluffs, they were the crown jewels of China's arsenal, each warhead carrying the destructive force of 5 to 10 Hiroshima bombs. At 4:42 a.m., the first launches erupted. Fireballs towered skyward from silos in Inner Mongolia, Sichuan, and Hubei. The ground quaked as the rockets screamed into the heavens, their exhaust splitting the night sky with white-hot trails of flame. Civilians filmed the spectacle in shock, the sight of nuclear fire piercing the darkness. In minutes, the warheads soared beyond the stratosphere, hurtling toward the Pacific at Mach 23, nearly 17,000 miles per hour. Their targets, American cities and California. Air raid sirens shrieked across Los Angeles, San Diego, and San Francisco. Families jolted awake as emergency broadcasts seized every television and radio. Highways clogged instantly as terrified residents fled in panic, fearing mushroom clouds on the horizon. In Seattle and Honolulu, churches flung open their doors as crowds poured inside to pray. For older Americans, it was a chilling return to the nightmares of the 1950s. Nuclear warheads were inbound. But this was not the 1950s. This was America in 2025. Within seconds, the U.S. Missile Defense Network roared to life. From Fort Greely, Alaska, 44 ground-based interceptors streaked into space at 22,000 miles per hour, racing to intercept the ICBMs as they crossed the exo-atmosphere. Along the Pacific coast, Aegis destroyers launched waves of SM-3 interceptors, each capable of obliterating a warhead with sheer kinetic force like a 10-ton truck smashing into its target at 1,000 miles per hour. In Guam and Hawaii, the batteries fired in rapid succession, while Patriot PAC-3 systems locked onto threats over urban centers. Above, satellites tracked every warhead in real time, guiding interceptors with accuracy down to inches. The battle unfolded silently in the upper atmosphere, unseen to human eyes but captured in exquisite detail by sensors. One by one, Chinese ICBMs disintegrated hundreds of miles above Earth, some exploding in fiery bursts, others fracturing into harmless debris. By the time the final warhead approached within 200 miles of American soil, it too was intercepted, reduced to glowing fragments that fell harmlessly into the Pacific. The results were staggering. 20 missiles launched, 20 destroyed. 0 American casualties, not a single U.S. city struck. For China, the cost was devastating. Each missile represented hundreds of millions of dollars and decades of research. With their destruction, Beijing's strategic deterrent lay in ruins. For the United States, it was the most decisive validation of missile defense in history. Yet victory carried a sobering truth. Beijing had shown it was willing to gamble with global annihilation. Washington now understood this was not a one-night battle, it was only the beginning of a far larger war. The Pentagon's answer came swiftly. As fragments of China's failed ICBM strike still burned across the Pacific sky, Washington made its choice. Beijing had attempted to rain nuclear fire on American soil and failed. Now the United States would ensure they could never try again. At 5:15 a.m. Washington time, U.S. Strategic Command initiated Operation Iron Thunder, a counterstrike not meant to punish, but to end China's capacity for escalation. The order carried with it a century of American doctrine, peace through overwhelming strength. The scale was unprecedented. From Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean, 3B-2 Spirits lifted into the sky alongside the first operational B-21 Raider stealth bomber, each one bearing payloads designed to cripple what remained of China's war machine, payloads of more than 80,000 pounds of precision ordnance waited in the bellies of American warplanes. From the carrier strike group stationed across the Pacific, 48 F-35 stealth fighters roared into the night sky, each fully armed with AMRAAM air-to-air missiles and JDAM smart bombs. Their engines thundered like rolling storms, a declaration of power carried on the wind. Supporting them high above, 6 KC-135 and KC-46 aerial refueling tankers took station, carrying enough fuel to sustain relentless combat operations for more than 12 continuous hours. And then came the most fearsome element of all, the silent hunters of the deep, Ohio-class nuclear submarines, submerged off the Chinese coastline, opened their launch hatches in unison. In a single, perfectly coordinated salvo, they fired 96 Tomahawk cruise missiles. Each missile was a steel spear, flying low at treetop level, skimming the earth for over 1,000 miles. Guided with pinpoint accuracy by GPS, the targets had been chosen with surgical precision. The Yulin Naval Base on Hainan Island, home to China's most prized nuclear submarine fleet. The Xianyang Air Base, housing the H-6K long-range bombers capable of carrying nuclear weapons. And a massive missile assembly complex in Chengdu, a facility responsible for producing critical parts for China's intercontinental ballistic missiles. At 5:54 a.m. local time, the first explosions ripped through the pre-dawn silence. At Yulin, Tomahawks tore into the submarine pens carved into sheer cliffs, their detonations cracking open reinforced blast doors. Fuel depots ignited, sending fireballs into the sky, and torpedoes stored inside the pens detonated in violent secondary explosions. Satellite feeds later confirmed the destruction of 4 nuclear-capable submarines, each valued at more than $2 billion. Minutes later, the strike expanded over Chengdu. A B-2 Spirit bomber released to GBU-57 bunker buster bombs, each weighing 30,000 pounds. The massive weapons burrowed deep into the reinforced factory floor before detonating. The resulting shockwaves obliterated assembly lines that produced an estimated 20 ICBMs every year. In less than 60 seconds, more than 600,000 square feet of industrial capacity was reduced to smoldering rubble at Xianyang Air Base. Wave after wave of F-35 strikes struck hardened aircraft shelters. Concrete bunkers crumbled beneath precision bombs, and rows of H-6 nuclear-capable bombers, each worth over $60 million, were shredded before they could even taxi onto the runway. By dawn, 11 bombers lay in twisted ruins, their hangars burning like funeral pyres against the horizon. The numbers told a devastating story. Out of 96 Tomahawks launched, 91 found their marks. In less than an hour, more than 1,200 Chinese military personnel were killed or wounded, and over $15 billion worth of military assets had been annihilated before sunrise. Aboard the USS Ronald Reagan, sailors watched live satellite imagery stream across screens. For them, the satisfaction was grim but undeniable. Just hours earlier, China had fired 20 ICBMs at U.S. cities, all intercepted in space by missile defenses. The same carrier that had nearly been crippled was now the platform delivering vengeance with ruthless precision. Back home, the images shocked Americans awake. The United States had demonstrated not only its shield, but also the terrifying reach of its sword. In a single night, China's strategic capabilities had been pushed back decades, Yet, beneath the sense of triumph, one chilling thought lingered: a wounded dragon was still a dragon, and Beijing, humiliated, enraged, and cornered, would not simply yield. By the time the sun rose over the Pacific, the scope of the American strike was clear. 3 strategic Chinese bases obliterated, 4 nuclear submarines destroyed, 11 bombers reduced to ashes, and ICBM factory flattened. In just 6 hours, the United States had erased nearly 20% of China's long-range strike power. The reaction worldwide was immediate. In Europe, NATO officials hailed the strike as proof that America remained the unmatched guardian of the free world. In Moscow, the Kremlin called for restraint in public, but privately marveled at the U.S. ability to destroy 3 hardened sites simultaneously without losing a single aircraft. On Chinese state television, anchors struggled to explain how 96 Tomahawk missiles and 8,000 pounds of bunker-busting ordnance had bypassed defenses with such chilling precision. For older generations of Americans, the images carried haunting echoes of history. The last time the world trembled so close to annihilation was during the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, when nuclear war loomed just minutes away. Now, more than -1 decades later, the nightmare had returned, except this time, missiles had been launched, bases reduced to ash, and thousands had bled. Yet America's shield had held. 20 Chinese ICBMs, each capable of killing millions, had been destroyed in space before they could touch U.S. soil. Not a single American city was struck. Not a single American civilian had died. The psychological blow to Beijing was immense. Generals who had boasted of an impenetrable missile wall now confronted the reality that decades of investment could be reduced to rubble in one coordinated night. Soldiers who believed American carriers were vulnerable now witnessed that even a wounded carrier could unleash destruction on an industrial scale. By dawn on August 18, 2025, the balance of power in the Pacific had been rewritten in fire. More than $20 billion in Chinese military assets destroyed, 1,500 troops killed or wounded, 15 strategic facilities crippled, and an entire generation of buildup reduced to ash. Around the globe, leaders scrambled to interpret the event. In Tokyo, it was called the largest single-night strike since the Gulf War. In London, analysts noted that America had unleashed more firepower in 6 hours than Britain had used during the entirety of the Falklands War. Even in Moscow, defense officials admitted in private that no system on Earth could have stopped such a perfectly coordinated assault. The parallels to history were chilling. In 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis ended without a shot fired. In 2025, the missiles had flown, the bases had burned, and lives had been lost. Yet, America's shield had stood firm, and its counterstrike had reminded the world of a timeless truth: to strike the United States is to invite ruin. But history also warned of something darker: a humiliated superpower is never safe. A cornered dragon may strike out in desperation. For now, the Pacific lay quiet, but the silence felt fragile, like the stillness before the next thunderclap. The events of August 17th to 18th, 2025 will be remembered as one of the most perilous confrontations since World War II. In less than 12 hours, the Pacific Ocean had witnessed 3 Chinese ICBMs launched, 20 more fired toward American cities, and more than 300 precision American strikes delivered in response. The cost: $35 billion in combined military assets destroyed, 1,500 Chinese casualties, and the near loss of a $13 billion U.S. aircraft carrier. The outcome: America's defenses held. Not a single U.S. city was struck, not a single American civilian died. The lesson resounded across the globe. Peace is not preserved through weakness, but through strength. The sailors and aviators of the U.S. Navy had stood firm under fire and struck back with unmatched precision, reminding the world why America still holds its place as the guardian of freedom upon the seas. The guns were silent, but unease remained. The world now asked the question that no one could yet answer: was this fragile calm the start of peace, or merely the quiet before the storm?